Hello, so today we're going to be talking about Jacob when he wrestled with God. And that story comes from Genesis 32. So let's go into our memory verse. Our memory verse comes from Genesis 32:26. I will not let you go unless you bless me. So after Jacob stole his brother's inheritance, and remember his brother was Esau, and he took Esau's birthright. Do we remember that from the last story? All right, well, after he did that, he was scared. Jacob's mother and father decided to send him to live with his uncle Laban in Haran. Laban tricked Jacob while he was there into marrying his daughter Leah, but that's not who Jacob really wanted to marry. Eventually, Laban gave him his other daughter, Rachel, who is who Jacob wanted to marry all along. And as Jacob was in Haran, he got richer and richer and richer, and his family got larger and larger and larger. One day, the Lord spoke to Jacob, and he told him to leave Haran and return to his father's land. So remember, who lives in his father's land is Esau, his brother, who was very upset with him. So when Jacob left, he took his entire family and all of his belongings, and it took him very close to the land of where his brother lived. Though it had been many, many, many years since he had seen Esau, guess what? Jacob was scared. That's right. He was afraid that Esau would carry out his threat to kill him for stealing his birthright and blessing. So this is what Jacob did. Jacob sent his servants ahead to let his brother know he was coming in peace because he didn't want any trouble. And when he did that, guess what? Esau sent no response to Jacob's message. But what Esau did was he started heading Jacob's way with 400 men. 400 men were coming his way, and Jacob was terrified. So you know what Jacob did? He devised a plan because he didn't want to lose everything. Remember, he had lots and lots of wealth, and he had a very large family. So he wanted to make sure, hey, if Esau comes and attacks me, I want to make sure that I can minimize how much Esau actually takes. So what he did was Jacob divided the people traveling with him into two camps. So he divided a camp here and a camp there. So that way, if they attacked one, he would still have the other. And after he divided the camps, Jacob prayed, and he reminded God of his promises to him. Jacob also prepared some gifts to send ahead to Esau. He also asked his wives and children to go ahead of him, leaving Jacob alone in the camp to prepare to meet his brother. So let me ask you this. Why was Jacob afraid of his brother Esau? Think about that. Why was he afraid? That's right, because Jacob was afraid that Esau would carry out his threat to kill him because Esau was mad, and he was upset because Jacob tricked him out of his birthright. Wouldn't you be mad too? Yeah, so would I. Let me ask you this. Has anyone ever been angry with you? Think about it. Maybe brothers, sisters, cousins, friends. It's not a very fun feeling when someone is angry with you. It could make you afraid. If we've done something wrong, the best thing that we can do is to own up to what we've done, apologize, and try to make amends. Now remember, Jacob, when he was traveling on his way back to his father's land, he divided everything that he had into two different camps. Why did he do this? I'm going to give you some time to think. That's right. He created two camps in an effort to reduce any losses. So he was expecting that Esau was going to attack him, right? That's right. Well, let me ask you this. Your parent promised to take you shopping for a new video game or maybe a baby doll or some clothes or some toys. Do you have to remind your parent of this promise? I know my kids will say, yes, we do. Sometimes mommy forgets. So we have to remind mommy what she said. So do you have to do that? Well, the truth is, sometimes people do forget. So there is no harm in reminding them. And there is no harm in reminding God of his promises to us. But there is no need to do so, because unlike me, God never forgets his promises, and he never fails to follow through. When Jacob reminded God of his promises, the reminder was more for him than for God, because Jacob needed to reassure himself that God was with him through every scary situation, and Jacob was really scared. So that night, after he divided the camp and he sent his family ahead of him, Jacob found himself alone. And while he was alone, he saw a figure emerge from the dark. And guess what? His fears gripped him. He got really scared. Could this be Esau or one of his men coming to murder him in the lonely wilderness in the dark of night? Jacob was not going to let himself be harmed, so he decided to go on the attack. He rushed toward the man, knocking him to the ground. He would wrestle with this man as if his life depended on it. And as the fight began, it was an even match, and they wrestled for hours. They wrestled all night. And as the fight wore on, Jacob realized that he was not fighting with Esau. I wonder, who was he wrestling with? Let's find out. In fact, he wasn't sure who he was fighting with, but he knew that this was not an ordinary man. Finally, at the end of the fight, the stranger simply touched, just like that, Jacob's hip socket. And immediately, Jacob felt his leg weaken and his hip shift out of joint. Have you ever been running and maybe sprained your ankle or something? I'm sure that hurt. Well, can you imagine the pain that Jacob was in? And all the man did was simply touch his hip. So let me ask you this. At first, who did Jacob think he was wrestling? Think about it. That's right. He thought he was wrestling Esau, or one of the men with Esau, because that's who he was afraid of, right? All right. Have you ever surprised yourself by doing something you didn't think you could do? Jacob was left alone in his camp so he could prepare himself for something terrifying. When a man came to him in the middle of the night, he just went for it and started wrestling him. He didn't know who he was or whether he was outmatched. He just started wrestling. This man could have been the very brother he was terrified to meet. But in the dark, all alone, Jacob suddenly found courage and defended himself. His response was a bit surprising. Even though he tried to wrestle, he knew that he couldn't win. "Now let me go," the man said to Jacob. "It's morning." But Jacob knew this was not an ordinary man. This was a messenger of God. And in spite of all the pain that he was in, Jacob had a hold on him. And you know what he told him? He said, "I won't let you go until you bless me." Jacob said, and the man asked Jacob's name, and Jacob told him, "I won't let you go until you bless me. Your name is now," this is what the man told Jacob. He said, "Your name is now Israel, because you have fought with God and men and were victorious." Isn't that an amazing blessing? Your name is Israel because you have fought with men and you were victorious. Something very special happened then. The sun rose gently in the sky as Jacob returned to see his family and to face Esau. Jacob was a changed man. He walked with a limp because, remember, he had been hurt. But he had a new name and a new identity. God had given Jacob a promise, and he would keep it. When Jacob met Esau that day, their meeting, guess what, was a happy one. Esau met him with a huge hug. That's right. He was happy to see his brother. And from that day forward, Jacob would lead a life of blessings. He still had his troubles, but he knew that God would always keep his promises. So, how did the stranger end the fight? That's right, the stranger simply touched Jacob's hip and shifted it out of place. Did God fight dirty against Jacob? No. God didn't need to hurt Jacob to win the fight. God put Jacob's hip out of place to help Jacob realize that he will always need God. Jacob knew that God had a plan for his life. He knew that God had promised to bless him. That didn't stop Jacob from going out and getting everything he wanted. And what happened when Jacob met Esau? Remember when we first started talking about this story, Jacob was so afraid that Esau would be mad at him, that Esau would try to kill him. But what happened? That's right. Esau was glad to see his brother and met him with a huge hug. Do you know what your name means? Many, if not most names in the Bible have a meaning. Some of them come from Hebrew words that they sound like. The name Jacob, which was Jacob's name, means he deceives or he cheats. And the Jacob in this story lives up to his name because remember, he cheated his brother Esau. In his past, when Jacob cheated Esau out of his birthright and deceived his father, he lived up to the name, which means he cheats. But God gave him a new name. He gave him not only a new name, but a new identity and a fresh start. What a wonderful and unexpected blessing. The name Jacob is very popular, and it should be made known that anyone named Jacob is not necessarily a bad person. But the name is now more associated with the character in the Bible who was a man of God and one of the fathers of faith. So that's our lesson for today. I hope you learned more about Jacob and his encounter with God. And what I want you to do, especially for you parents out there, remember, go to the church YouTube page and download this week's activities because there's more stuff to do. And learn your memory verse. See you soon, and God bless.
After Jacob stole his brother's inheritance, he was scared. He ran away and went to live with his uncle Laban in Haran. Laban tricked Jacob into marrying his daughter Leah, but eventually gave him his other daughter, Rachel, who Jacob wanted to marry all along. Jacob got richer, and his family got larger. As time came for Jacob to leave his uncle's land, he took all his family and belongings and started to travel. Jacob's travels took him close to the land of his brother Esau. Though it had been years since he had seen Esau, he was still very afraid. Jacob sent his servants ahead to let his brother know he was coming in peace. Esau came with 400 men, and that terrified Jacob. Jacob prepared some gifts to send ahead to his brother. He also asked Leah and her children to go ahead while he followed. Jacob was still very scared and decided to spend the night alone while he was preparing and waiting to meet his brother Esau. That night, as he was alone, Jacob saw a figure emerge from the dark. His fears gripped him. Could this be Esau? Was Esau now trying to murder him in this lonely wilderness in the dark of night? Jacob was not going to let himself be harmed, so he decided to go on the attack. He rushed toward the man, knocking him to the ground. He was determined to find out who this man was. He would wrestle this man as if his life depended upon it. The fight began. It was an even match, and they wrestled for hours. Neither man could defeat the other. As the fight wore on, Jacob realized that he was not fighting with Esau. In fact, he wasn't sure who this stranger was. But he knew that this wasn't an ordinary man. The light began to break, and the stranger asked Jacob to let him go, but Jacob refused and wanted to know the stranger's name. Finally, to end the fight, The stranger simply touched Jacob's hip socket. Immediately, Jacob felt his leg weaken as his hip shifted out of joint. Even though he tried to wrestle, he knew that he couldn't win. "Now, let me go," the man said to Jacob. "It's morning." But Jacob knew that this was no ordinary man. This was a messenger of God. In spite of his pain, Jacob had a hold of him. "I won't let you go unless you bless me," Jacob said. "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob." Then the man blessed him. "Your name is now Israel. You have fought with God and men, and you were victorious." Something very special had just happened to Jacob. The sun rose gently in the sky as Jacob returned to see his family and face Esau. Jacob was a changed man. He walked with a limp, but he had a new name, a new identity. God had given Jacob a promise, and he would keep it.